It's been a month since the Vatican released its shipwreck of a document, Fiducia Supplicans. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you here with yet another detailed analysis of the document itself. There's already been a million of those published over these last 4 weeks. Instead, what we need to do now, today, is take a step back and look more generally and prophetically at what's happening in light of this document, as well as some other recent developments that are similar. Mark Mallet and I made a video the very day that document came out. Now, I made a little joke in the beginning of that video over on Countdown to the Kingdom, Queen of Peace Media, I made a joke about the document being 45 paragraphs long, and apparently some people took that as an implication that I hadn't read it, but I had indeed read the document. Anyway, here is what I said then. Let's take a quick look at that.
So what we have now is global headlines dominated by this idea that the Vicar of Christ has now enabled an intrinsically disordered situation to be blessed. That scandal is unprecedented in 2,000 years, and the Pope's planers are going to want to say, "Oh no, everything's fine. It's just a few crazy rad trads missing."
All right, let me pause that there. So I said this was a scandal unprecedented in 2,000 years, and later in the just a couple seconds later, I'll spare you playing it again here. You can see it over on Queen of Peace Media. I said that if this isn't a scandal, then there is no such thing as scandal, and today, a month later, I stand by that. This document is an enormous scandal, and it may well be the biggest yet in the whole history of the church, but even that is probably only a preview of what is coming soon. Now, later in that video with Mark Mallet, I even called Fiducia Supplicans a psyop, and a couple of minutes after that, I explained what I meant by that here. Let me find that spot.
They caught my eye, Daniel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this idea that we can't, that there's this separate thing called the doctrine of the Holy Father. This you could say that was a slip of the tongue in September. But then a firestorm erupted among traditionally minded Catholics, rightfully so, because that sounded off. So maybe we could write that off at first as a slip of the tongue, but then it happened again, not as a comment or anything, but as the introduction to this declaration from the CDF or DDF, whichever you want to call it. So he talks about the doctrine of Pope Francis, but then he also says, and this is where he's trying to slip in a little maneuver, I believe. He says this text. He says there's a real development. That's a dog whistle. I'm sorry to use that phrase, but that's a dog whistle for saying we're overturning 2,000 years of sacred tradition. That's what that phrase, a real development, that's become a code word in the last several years for we're overturning the magisterium. So he says it's a real development about blessings. And then he says that because it's a real development, that's why this document has taken on the, quote, typology of a declaration, which is nonsensical. We don't have typologies about CDF documents. That's not a thing. He's making this up. There's CDF rulings, and they don't have all these varying degrees like papal magisterium.
Right.
So he's trying to say that this is a declaration. Why? It's obvious. He's trying to insinuate, falsely, that this document overrules the 2021 document from the CDF that was absolutely clear. Short and sweet and to the point, saying God cannot bless sin. It was clear, it was easy, it was short, it was to the point. Nobody who read it had any confusion. People who read this 45 paragraph.
All right, pause that there. So people are wondering, what do I think about that now? A month later, I said all that the day it came out. Well, I stand by all of that today. Why? Because if all this document was intending to say that sinful persons can be blessed, then it's a pointless document. Everybody already knew that sinful persons could be blessed. That's why I can be blessed. I'm a very sinful person. And of course, the document itself rejects that interpretation. As I played there in the clip there, quoting from the document itself, it is claiming that it is a development of doctrine. The document tries to kind of claim for itself this high authority, and maybe I overspoke a bit there. I'm not saying there's some differentiations within CDF Now, DDF decrees. But for it to claim for itself the right to develop doctrine, that is completely beyond its jurisdiction. It's completely bogus. The CDF or the DDF cannot do that. Its role is to apply existing doctrine in its current form and understanding in order to clarify things, and especially to refute error. So whoever is trying to argue that this document is not attempting to change anything major is being completely incoherent, and they're opposing the very document that they're proposing that they are defending. So it's nonsensical. In fact, the document indicates that homosexual couples as homosexual couples can be blessed in a priestly manner. Now, it is not possible to hold that view and at the same time to agree with the infallible teaching of the Church for 2,000 years as reiterated by the Catechism of the Catholic Church, as we can find it right here, paragraphs 2357 to 2358. Catechism teaches that tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. Now, the Pope's planners say, oh, no, but that's okay. The document is not condoning those. Okay, well, what does it say? What does the Catechism say? In the next paragraph, it says that the inclination, the homosexual inclination that is objectively disordered. It's not, you can't separate the two. You can't claim that all is fine and dandy as long as you're not blessing the homosexual, the acts of sodomy themselves. You're just blessing a couple. No, the Church infallibly teaches that this inclination itself, this situation itself, is objectively, intrinsically, gravely disordered. And that really is what this is all about. This is indeed an attempt to completely overturn Catholic teaching on the fact that certain situations and certain inclinations are intrinsically, objectively, gravely disordered, contrary to God's will, that is to say. So you can't just say, I'm blessing this homosexual couple as a homosexual couple, but I'm not blessing the sexual portion of the union, so it's all good. No, it's not all good. You are blessing something intrinsically, objectively, gravely disordered according to infallible, perennial Catholic teaching based on sacred scripture and sacred tradition. And this becomes completely obvious when you apply the exact same theological dynamics to any other situation whatsoever. That is, any other situation beyond the sexual sins that are fashionable today to pretend are okay. Imagine anyone can come up with any analogous situation to properly discern this and realize what's going on here. Imagine a drug addict comes to a priest with his syringe full of heroin in hand, and he says, will you bless me and my syringe? Imagine a slave owner brings his slave in to a priest and says, will you bless this partnership? Don't worry, you're not blessing the slavery, so to speak. You're just blessing the slave and slave owner as partners in industry. That would never happen. It's comical to even propose that because of how outlandish it is, and yet it's the exact same dynamics as what this document, Fiducia Supplicans, is proposing. Imagine two mafia hitmen coming to a priest and saying, will you bless our collaboration? Will you bless us as a hitman duo? Don't worry, you're not blessing the murders themselves that we commit. You're not blessing that. You're just blessing this hitman duo itself. Never in a million years. Anyone with a conscience would realize that that is a hair-splitting distinction without a difference. A distinction without a difference. You can actually posit almost identical situations with other sexual sins that are still politically correct to be opposed today. For example, polygamy or pedophilia. If a polygamist comes in with his 3 wives asking for a blessing of the quad couple or the quadruple or whatever you would call it, or a pedophile coming in with a child that he's abusing, that's not some weird hypothetical either. The church has had to deal with this for 2,000 years, this exact situation. When pagan cultures became evangelized at first, they were often saturated with polygamy and pedophilia before Christianity came and cast out those demons. Now, the priests did not go into those cultures and bless the polygamous unions or the pedophilic ones. So if we don't bless the junkie and his syringe, or the slave owner and his slave, or the polygamist and his many wives, we have absolutely no right to bless homosexual couples as such either. And if we're going to bless homosexual couples, then we have to bless all those other intrinsically disordered situations as well, which of course no one is proposing, because those defending this document are being outright hypocrites. The same exact, quote, nuances in Fiducia Supplicans, the nuances of the Pope's plainers, they could justify all of those situations, those same nuances proposed in this document and proposed by the theologians and apologists defending this document. Those same nuances would indeed equally validly defend all of those utterly outlandish and ridiculous situations I just delineated, and a million others. Yet none of them are advocating for that. Because, well, again, they are hypocrites. They're two-faced. They're moral relativists. Whether they realize it or not, they are becoming active participants in the long prophesied great apostasy. Anyone with an ounce of Christian common sense knows that intrinsically disordered situations cannot be blessed. There's no grounds for that in the Old Testament. There's no grounds for that in the New Testament. There's no grounds for that in the actual magisterium of the church or anywhere in sacred tradition. There's a reason we don't find any precedent for this. You know, the document itself, it quotes a number of scriptural examples of blessings, and none of them are analogous to what it proposes in blessing homosexual couples. So this blessing of an intrinsically disordered situation, as such, it's ruled out, period. Anyway, I don't want to go more into the details of the document itself. As I said, my goal with today's video is not to present yet another analysis. It's to look at the broader situation. In the time since a month ago, the day it came out, when I called this document a psyop and an enormous, unprecedented scandal, we've had since then a tsunami of faithful shepherds in the church absolutely rejecting this document. In fact, every single shepherd, that is every bishop, that I personally have looked to for years for guidance in navigating these perilous times that we're in, every single one such shepherd has resoundingly rejected Fiducia Supplicans, every single one. So let's compare the two sides here. We have a document written by one cardinal, Cardinal Fernandez, who we now know is a total sexual pervert. And yes, it has the Pope's signature slapped on the bottom of it, which does not make it a binding magisterial teaching, as we'll discuss later in this video if I have time. So that's what we have on one hand, along with, you know, the self-absorbed theologians and Pope's plainers who think that they themselves are also infallible. And on the other hand, we have, let's take a look at it. Okay, let's see who we have on the other hand here. We've got every faithful shepherd who we have known for years we should look to for guidance in navigating these perilous times. Let's run through several of them. We got Bishop Strickland saying we must say no to this, and he has emphasized that again and again repeatedly. We've got Bishop Schneider and his fellow bishop there in Kazakhstan. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He has repeatedly, strongly spoken against this declaration. Bishop Eleganti, this bishop is particularly prophetic. I can't remember off the top of my head which country. I think he might be from Switzerland. But anyway, he's written prophetically for years. In fact, I quoted him in my most recent book, Only Man Bears His Image. I can't reach it right now. But he's got a lot of truly prophetic declarations to share with us, and he himself is rejecting this as proposing a sinful practice being blessed. He's being honest here. He is refusing to succumb to hair-splitting distinctions. Bishop Eleganti. We've got Archbishop Chaput, who has long been a real prophet in the church among our shepherds. He is calling this double-minded exercise in affirming and undercutting Catholic teaching. And that's a very important point. The Pope's plainers are all saying, oh, look, no, the document itself, it says we're not blessing sin, we're not blessing the unions. And look, Cardinal Fernandez himself came out and said we're not blessing sin, we're not blessing unions. We can read. We know that the document claims that it's saying that. It is contradicting itself, is our entire point. Those of us who are sounding the alarm about this. It is incoherent. It is sophistry, as Archbishop Chaput points out here. Okay, moving along. We've got Cardinal Sarah, one of the greatest of the shepherds alive today. He's long been my favorite, in fact. He is so spot on in the straight and narrow. He does not become a schismatic rebel against the Pope, but he also is absolutely firm in rejecting modernism in all its forms. He's, of course, a cardinal, not just a bishop, not just an archbishop, a cardinal. He is calling it lies, compromise, and confusion, Cardinal Sarah. We've got Cardinal Mueller. He himself was the prefect for the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith in better days. He is calling it impossible and blasphemous to bless homosexual couples, as this document, Fiducia Supplicans, is claiming we can and must and even do. Bishop János Székely has written, along the whole Hungarian Conference of Bishops rejected this document, but Bishop János here, he came out with his own additional letter saying, no, we cannot bless homosexual couples. And I'm particularly fond of this document that he wrote because I actually interviewed him, which should be up on YouTube soon. Stay tuned for that. He's a very faithful shepherd and clearly a very pious and holy man as well, very humble, and he is not at all out to try to make a name for himself or anything. I know that people love to claim, anyone who dares to point out any problems with this pontificate, they're just craving attention. That's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And this man is as humble as they come, and he is saying, no, we cannot bless homosexual couples. Moving along here, we've got Archbishop Aguirre saying this document must not be obeyed. When we get to the African bishops, we've got the whole continent, the most faithful continent on earth in the faith, the Africans. They are going to save the world through their faith. And we've got all of them, the whole continent of African bishops, rejecting this document. And I've got several individual bishops here noted. We've got the Archbishop of Nairobi. We've got the bishops in Malawi. We've got Bishop Kariuki. We've got the bishops in Zambia joining the bishops in Malawi. We've got Ivory Coast. We've got Cameroon saying that it's formally forbidding all blessings of homosexual couples. Anyway, we could go on, but the point is, the Africans, they've got it right. And we better start listening to them. As Pope Francis always says, listen to the peripheries, right? Well, they're the peripheries. They're as periphery as you can get, and they are suffering for the faith like nobody else is. They are being slaughtered there in Africa by the Islamic militants for the faith. They have a sincere, pure, and pious faith, and they are unanimously standing against this document. And if that doesn't settle the matter right there for you, I don't know what you're smoking, basically. All right, moving along here. This Dutch bishop is Bishop Rob Musarts. He has long also been a prophetic voice. He is saying that this document is garbage. He's calling it cowardly, and we've got so many more. All right. I had a very partial overview there, but hopefully that gives you a brief taste of the faithful shepherds and those we should be looking to for guidance and their take on this. But it's not just all of these individual, faithful, Christ-loving, church-loving shepherds who are rejecting this document. It's entire bishops' conferences. As I said, the whole continent of Africa, yes, has rejected this, but it's not only them. The Hungarian bishops, the Polish bishops, but perhaps most significantly, let me go on here to the next page here, the entire Ukrainian rite of the church. Ukrainian Greek Catholic, and that's just one of the couple dozen rites of the Catholic Church. Obviously, we're all aware of the Latin rite of the church. It's the biggest rite, it's by far, but the second biggest rite in the church, this is fully Catholic. This is not Eastern Orthodox. This is fully Catholic. This is the Ukrainian rite of the church, the second biggest. Again, they have completely rejected this document. The entire, not just a continent, not just an individual bishop, not just a bishop's conference, but an entire rite of the church is saying, nope, we're not doing this. They have rejected it. And they too have long proven their faithfulness, certainly much more so than the European bishops. All right. So there's in fact, there's more we could talk about here. Let me actually queue up a page I found as I was doing research here. Whoops. There is even a Wikipedia page showing the opponents of Fiducia Supplicans, and it's a very partial list, might I add, but this is really this is really extraordinary for there to be a whole Wikipedia page listing the opponents And I'm focusing here on bishops. There are shepherds. They truly participate in the magisterium, even though they don't have individually the charism of infallibility like the Pope can exercise in certain circumstances. Our shepherds, our bishops, nevertheless do constitute the magisterium in a real sense of the word. So that's there's obviously many other theologians who have rightly called this out. I'm not focusing on that here, simply because I want to focus on the most important points here, but there's much that could and should be said about that as well. Anyway, this is the side sounding the alarm about this document, pointing out how, frankly, blasphemous it is. What about the flip side? And we have to discern the tree by its fruits. Jesus says that is the chief mode of discernment. So you look at what something generates in its aftermath, and you can infer, which is, you could say, indirect, but it's nevertheless the most confident form of spiritual discernment. You can infer the nature of the tree by the fruits it produces in time. So what about the flip side? What about those who are embracing this document and saying it's great and it's wonderful, it's a blessing for the church, it's a step forward? That's exactly what we should have expected as well. Everyone that we should have long known is in fact a wolf in sheep's clothing is saying precisely that this document is just a wonderful, amazing blessing. Let's take a look at those. We've got the LGBT Catholic groups celebrating it, being exuberant over it. Dignity USA, New Ways Ministry, Father James Martin, they have all sounded, not the alarm, they have sounded the trumpet blasts of rejoicing over this document. We've got Cardinal Supich, who, if you've been awake, if you've been alive for the last several years, you know to be very, how shall I put this, very cautious about anything that he comes out in support of, that anything he chooses to distinguish himself by. Let me put it that way. He's praising it. We've got the heterodox German bishops, those who have long promoted outright blatant formal heresy in the synodal way. They are praising this document as a Christmas gift. And of course, it came out several days before Christmas, so they're just thrilled about it. America Magazine, which has been promoting heresy for many, many years, the Jesuit periodical there, they took out who knows how many countless thousands of dollars they paid for this. Wonder where all that money's coming from. They're a very rich order, of course, but they took out this huge ad in the New York Times declaring that the Catholic Church is changing because Pope Francis is allowing the blessings of homosexual couples, the blessings of their relationships. And this is of course an advertisement for them to make more money, $5.99 a month subscribing to them, but it's also clearly advocating for dissent here. Moving along, we've got Joe Biden, the commander, the nominal fake Catholic in chief here, Commander-in-Chief of the United States military, President of the United States, a dissenting Catholic, if there ever was one, who's rejoicing over this document here. We've got Chris Christie, another wannabe president. He, I believe, dropped out of the race recently. He's saying now he's endorsing gay marriage because of this Vatican document, another fruit of the document. We've got now huge scandals, stories like this, where we've got history being made. Quote, this was retweeted by Father James Martin on Twitter from his group Outreach Catholic, which is this homosexual advocacy group, saying that history is being made because because of same-sex couples who are civilly married now being blessed by priests. And this picture has now made its rounds across the world in global headlines. The whole world now thinks that the one and only church that Jesus Christ founded is blessing intrinsic, grave evil. So do I stand by what I said the day this came out? This is a scandal the likes of which the church has never seen in its history. Yes, I do stand by that. This is apocalyptic. This is as bad as it not I shouldn't say this is as bad as it gets, because it's going to get worse as the great apostasy continues to develop, but this is as bad as we have seen. So having run through all of that right now, if you worry that you just can't figure out all this chaos in the church, you don't need to worry any longer, because God has made this incredibly easy to discern correctly, at least for those who are interested in the truth. We have every bishop that we have always known as a faithful shepherd, in love with Jesus Christ, in love with the Catholic Church. Every single such shepherd warning us in the gravest possible terms against this document. And on the flip side, we've got the document itself, which is not binding. The Pope putting his signature on something from the Vatican, yeah, that's a big deal. That's apocalyptic, as we'll get to. But that does not make it a binding teaching that Catholics are obliged to accept. Absolutely not. It is not an act of papal magisterium wherein the Pope is directly using binding language. Not even close. So when you sincerely weigh the authority of this document against the resounding, unanimous consensus of every single faithful shepherd in the church, it's extremely easy to see where the truth lies. Even if you struggle to directly figure out the theology involved, you're not going to be condemned for struggling with the more nuanced points of theology. Just discern based on what you're seeing before your eyes here. And based on what we've been given, I'm actually very surprised at this. I didn't think God would make discerning the opening acts of the Great Apostasy so easy. But he did. And I love being pleasantly surprised in that way. But there's also a danger here. When God makes discerning the truth so simple, as he has in this case, that also means that there's something we have to admit about those who nevertheless insist upon believing the lie opposed to this clear and simple truth that he has made clear and simple through the fruits. Such people who side with the lie, even when God has made the truth simple and clear, such people are at great risk of explicitly joining the great apostasy and the anti-church when the Antichrist is revealed, which is probably coming very soon. If you've deluded yourself into thinking that you can trust any document that comes out of the Vatican or any personal opinion of Pope Francis, then you are at this point potentially mere moments away from succumbing to the antics of the Antichrist. If you've decided that you're just going to stick with your favorite theologian no matter what, even when he leads you into the apostasy, as he is in fact doing now, if he's defending this document, or if he's saying that aliens are here, or whatever else, if you've decided to do that, just turn off your brain and just hand over your discernment to some theologian in a collar, and to make that man your norm of discernment, you've already succumbed to the dark side. You better wake up before it's too late to leave the dark side. The more degrees someone has these days, the more suspicious you should be of him, no matter how many good things he's done or said in the past, because you are running out of time. You need to leave those voices aside, those voices who are leading you into the apostasy, and leave them aside permanently. Pray for them. Pray for them to come to their senses. Pray for a miracle for them, but don't listen to them anymore. Because obviously it's not just fiducia supplicans. That, I believe, was indeed the opening act of something very dark and very apocalyptic. But even more recently, we had Pope Francis say that he hopes that hell is empty. He basically stated that he thinks it is. Now, just last week, if you're already subscribed to my channel, maybe you saw my video 1 week ago, where I focused on how we can and should have great hope for the salvation of our own souls and the souls of our loved ones, in opposition to those who say that practically everyone goes to hell. That we should have great hope for the salvation of everyone, even those souls who seem so lost to us, even your straying family members who have rejected every imposition of graceless law. You should still have great hope for their salvation, especially because of the extraordinary mercy of Jesus Christ at the moment of death. And I absolutely stand by everything I said in that video. But I also said in that video that it was materially heretical to hope that hell is empty. Here's the clip. Heresy of living a lifestyle that involves at least one of those things, usually multiple. So there's very little hope that they are in a state of grace treading the path to heaven. as they're living their lives. So at this point, you might be wondering, am I contradicting myself now? Sorry, that was the wrong clip. Okay, here's the correct clip. Please God be a consoling one. But I'm not going to give you some universalist or quasi-universalist heresy, because that's very popular in the church today. That's the other error we have to be even more zealous to avoid. This idea that we can, quote, reasonably hope that all are saved. Well, no, we can't reasonably hope that. You can't reasonably hope in a lie. It is a fact that many souls go to hell. This is beyond clear. It's beyond settled from scripture and magisterium and sacred tradition and private revelation. So I'm sorry, von Balthasar, your Dare We Hope thesis, I think that was the name of his book where he famously proposed this, that's materially heretical. It's just the age-old heresy of Origen, the heretical church father, Origen's version of Universalism, and it has a superficial modification attached to it, but it doesn't at all alter its essence. So, but on the flip side, okay. So yes, I absolutely stand by this. So I claimed that, I put that up a week ago, and I do not take that back. But then a mere 3 days after I published that video, we have the Pope saying that he thinks hell is empty. And let's take a look at what he said just after that. He says, I like to think of hell as empty. And then, predictably, the Pope splainers are always right on the... They're always very quick to give a answer that seems like it could have been generated by AI. Oh, no, he just enjoys imagining that. No, that's not what he said. He says, he doesn't say, I would like to think of hell as empty. He says, I like to think of hell as empty. So unless you're accusing him of being deceptive and duplicitous and lying to himself or schizophrenic or something, you have to acknowledge he's saying that he does think that hell is empty. Unless you're accusing him of being completely mentally disordered and just liking to think of things that are false. No, he clearly thinks hell is empty, and he clarifies, as you have right there on the screen. He says, I hope it is. So he hopes hell is empty. This is exactly verbatim what I said 3 days before is materially heretical. Materially meaning not formally. So if something is formally heretical, the church has already explicitly condemned it as a heresy, and you are explicitly proposing it obstinately. I'm not claiming that's the case. I'm claiming it's materially heretical. It's in fact, in substance, contradicts all sorts of teachings that we must hold to be true. And we can find countless cases. I don't want to dedicate this video to that. But we can find countless cases in magisterium and sacred tradition and the Old Testament and the New Testament, both private revelation, the unanimous consensus of all private revelation, indicating that many souls have indeed gone to hell, that they are in fact falling into hell like snowflakes. So to hope that hell is empty, yeah, that's a materially heretical hope right there. And for someone to just jump at the drop of a hat to defend this diabolical claim, that is so outlandish. And I hope you realize what these people are doing when they're condemning you, saying you're a terrible Catholic if you dare contradict any of these crazy things that Pope Francis is saying in his personal opinions. These Pope splainers, these self-absorbed theologians, they are gaslighting you. They are psychologically and spiritually abusing you. Even Pope St. John Paul II condemned this utterly absurd and outlandish and heretical idea that we can hope hell is empty. So what? Am I now a bad Catholic if I quote a recent canonized Saint Pope because Pope Francis thinks otherwise? It's absurd. And this diabolical lie that we can hope that hell is empty, this undermines everything in the faith. Whoever thinks that hell is empty is almost by definition going to be flippant and reckless and dismissive about orthodoxy and infallible Catholic teaching on morals, especially sexual morality, going to be dismissive of sacred tradition, and on the list goes. So, why bother with any of that? Why bother with any of those, quote, burdens if hell is empty anyway? If hell is empty, then there's no such thing as a risk to salvation. So this empty hell idea explains a lot of the garbage we've been seeing coming from the Vatican recently. It's actually quite similar to belief in aliens. It's just one diabolical lie that isn't yet formally condemned as an explicit heresy directly by the Extraordinary Magisterium. But nevertheless, it invariably leads to something. Its corollaries inescapably collapse into something even worse than simple heresy. That is, total apostasy. Belief in an empty hell removes all urgency, all direness from conversion and repentance and dogma and all of that. In a similar fashion, belief in aliens makes the whole faith seem small and boring and partial. I'm going to have another video up about this soon, hopefully. It's this one little lie through which they can try to phrase the whole faith as just, oh yeah, I mean, that's all true and great and stuff, and it's good for Sundays and Mass, and yeah, it applies to this little sphere of space that encompasses the third rock from the sun, but that's just the tiniest little part of the picture. The bigger picture is the extraterrestrial stuff there, and when they come in, when they pierce the clouds and come down, they're going to give us the big revelation. And you can subscribe to this diabolical, apocalyptic, antichristic lie while still pretending to be a good Orthodox Catholic, simply because belief in aliens is not yet explicitly condemned as a formal heresy. Same thing with empty hell. It's this one diabolical lie that undermines everything else. So make no mistake about it. Both of these lies are proximate, meaning imminent preparations for the entrance of the Antichrist. When the great deception itself comes, it will no doubt be promoted within and by the Vatican itself. So that's been my thesis for a long time now, and I stand by it. And considering that, in a way, this chaos with fiducia supplicans is actually a godsend. Of course, don't misunderstand. In the main way, in the primary way, the direct way, it's a horrendous disaster. It's leading homosexuals to hell by giving them the false impression that the church blesses their intrinsically disordered relationships. But yes, there is a silver lining to what's going on right now. God's permissive will always reigns supreme, even when his ordained will is being rejected. It's as if through all this chaos, God put a big sign on everyone that you need to steer clear of with their responses to this document. If your favorite theologian or apologist or what have you has come out in defense of this document, now is the time to leave that individual aside for good. He'll only lead you deeper and deeper into the great apostasy and the great deception. Now, some people are sincerely confused. I'm not trying to encourage any fanaticism here, but for a theologian who's really studied this and studied all the ins and outs, for a theologian to present some lengthy defense of this, as many have, that is your sign to run in the opposite direction and never return to that person again. That person will simply seduce you with his sophistry. The whole time, he'll be an expert in convincing you that the great apostasy is actually orthodox. And in that regard, let me just quote here something I wrote in my blog almost 3 years ago about that very thing. I wrote that there are plenty of other ways to destroy your soul and your life than succumbing to formal heresy. We can rest assured that come the days when the diabolical quantum leap, I used that then as my phrase for the great deception, this sci-fi deception, especially of aliens, but also of other things. When it is foisted upon us, there will be many learned theologians that we thought we could trust, who will calmly assure us that we can submit to its diabolical tenets. And these tenets, quote, do not constitute contradictions of the faith. Yes, it will be precisely the scholars, both inside and outside of the church, that the Antichrist will have and largely has had the easiest time deceiving. So again, I wrote that almost 3 years ago, and if you look at what certain so-called Orthodox-minded theologians and scholars have said since then, you'll see that this is exactly what has happened. And Venerable Halshauser prophesied it in the 1600s. He talked about how they will ridicule Christian simplicity. They will call it folly and nonsense, but they will have the highest regard for advanced knowledge, clouded by senseless and elaborate arguments. As a result, no principle at all, however holy, authentic, ancient, and certain it may be, will remain free from censure, criticism, false interpretation, modification, and delimitation by man. He is describing our days to a T. And you realize that immediately if you've been paying any attention. I want to point out one other extremely important thing about the situation created by this Vatican document, and I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball at you here. The theologians and apologists and pope-splainers out there who are vociferously defending this document, we've already settled that they're out of their minds, yes, but they're actually right about one thing. They go on and on quoting all sorts of popes from ages past who talked about how important it is to have submission to the Vicar of Christ, and not just when he's making an infallible declaration, but in his various other teachings as well, and in the Vatican documents as well that he signs off on. And every time the pope-splainers and whatever say that, the run-of-the-mill, quote, conservative Catholic commentators, they accuse these people of being Ultramontanist heretics. But that accusation actually doesn't make any sense. Ultramontanism is not a defined heresy. In fact, for almost all of church history, the word itself, Ultramontanism, was just synonymous with Catholicism. It was simply a recognition of papal supremacy, which, in fact, we do believe as Catholics. Now, if you want to define the word Ultramontanism to mean, quote, the proposition that the Pope is infallible even when he's not speaking infallibly, then yes, obviously, I mean, that's trivial. Obviously, that's definitionally erroneous. But that's not what the pope-splainers are saying. They're not saying that this Vatican decree, for example, Fiducia Supplicans, they're not saying it's infallible. They're just saying that we Catholics are bound to respond to its erroneous teachings with a pious submission of intellect and will. So the Ultramontanism accusation, it makes no sense here. And yet, at the same time, these pope-splainers are clearly wrong. I mean, we've already made that obvious in the earlier parts of this video. Now, at this point, any sedevacantists who are watching this video might be getting a bit excited because they might think that I'm working my way up to the conclusion that Francis must not be Pope and the Holy See must be vacant. Well, sorry to disappoint, but no. They are wrong also. In fact, all three of these groups share the same basic fundamental flaw. And that fundamental fatal flaw is phobia of private revelation. And it is apocalyptophobia, terror of the consideration of apocalyptic events being perhaps imminent. The pope-splainers, they're right enough that regarding Fiducia Supplicans as traditionalist Catholics now do, and as I now do, and as all these faithful shepherds now do, they're right enough in pointing out that in earlier ages that would be very problematic and maybe even unacceptable to approach a Vatican document that way. But the real problem with the pope-splainers is that they are so terrified of, and they're so opposed to the thought that we are approaching apocalyptic times, that they denounce or perhaps ignore the suggestion that we used the tools of discernment proper to apocalyptic times. But every single authentic apparition for decades, and some much longer than that have touched on this point, have expressly warned of the imminence of the very apostasy that we're now witnessing. I've been promoting these messages for 15 years now, but plenty of my colleagues have been doing so for much longer. And I can say that the only thing that would surprise me, the only thing that would be weird and surprising now, is if we weren't witnessing a great apostasy spreading within the highest levels of the church, because that's what we've been warned of for so long. Now, this does not mean that our calling now is to start rejecting the true magisterium. Absolutely not. It means that we need to go back to the basics and consider on a fundamental level what our calling as Catholics is. But here's the paradox. You can't look within Catholic documents to find out how you must respond to Catholic documents. That's circular reasoning. And it's the logical fallacy of begging the question. Besides, no effect is greater than its cause. You can't say that the church is authoritative because the church is authoritative. You can't say that the church is infallible because the church teaches the church is infallible. That makes no sense. That might be pedagogically helpful. Don't get me wrong. That might be epistemologically helpful, quoting Vatican I or whatever else on papal infallibility, for example, to illustrate and to detail and to teach on the submission that we must have to the magisterium. That's very helpful. But metaphysically and logically and ontologically, it's useless. If you're quoting some document to demonstrate the church's infallibility, you're already by definition presupposing the infallibility of the church in that very act. And that's not a very convincing argument, is it? Now, obviously, I'm not at all speaking against the infallibility of the church. The church, specifically the ex cathedra definitions of the Pope, they are infallible, absolutely. I'm not at all throwing any doubt on that. But the reason they are infallible is not found primarily within church declarations, because as we discussed, that's circular reasoning. The reason they are infallible, the reason the church has divine authority to teach and to demand submission, is from our Lord Jesus Christ. It has to come from a higher cause than itself, specifically his promise to Peter. Whoops. Matthew 16, 8-19. And I say to thee, thou art Peter. And upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give to thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind upon earth, it shall be bound also in heaven. And whatever thou shalt loose upon earth, it shall be loosed also in heaven. That is why and how the church is authoritative. That is why it is, and can, or at least can be, depending upon what is being declared, infallible. So it's actually very simple. Sure, in better days, up until several years ago, in fact, we could basically just trust just about every official document that came out of the Vatican. Those days are gone. They're not gone permanently. They will come back, and they will return, and they will resurrect more gloriously than ever before. But for now, they are dead and gone. And all the prophecies that have been warning us for decades, the time that they have been warning us of is here. Seer after seer after seer has received authentic messages from heaven indicating that the great apostasy will reach the very summit the divine providence could possibly allow it to reach, but not 1 inch further, because the promises of Christ are absolute, irrevocable, and nothing can so much as scratch them. But where the question then remains, where does that limit lie? The ultimate question is singular and simple. Did the Pope bind something? That is what Jesus said to Peter. Whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. If the Pope, and of course we're talking about keys here, and this is where the Protestants are, delusional. Jesus gave Peter keys. Why do you think he gave him keys? Because keys are handed on. He didn't just give Peter a blessing or something. He gave him keys. The next Peter had the keys after him. The next Peter had the keys after him. They are handed down in unbroken succession to Pope Francis today, and they will be until the end of time, whether you like it or not. The Pope of the Catholic Church, and he alone, has these keys. No one else ever will. So if you're not Catholic, you better become Catholic soon. You're not going to find an authority that can bind on earth as in heaven anywhere else. Anywhere else. Your Pastor Bob at your local Southern Baptist church certainly can. All right, anyway. Whatsoever thou shalt bind upon earth, it shall be bound in heaven. So if the Pope binds something on earth, it's bound in heaven. If he's doing anything other than that, if he's slapping his signature on something, if he's giving an opinion, even if it's a very vocal, convicted one, even if he's repeatedly saying something, whatever, if he's not binding it, it's not necessarily bound in heaven. It might be true, but it's only if he's binding it that is necessarily true. Bound in heaven, that is. And another way of looking at this is the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. If something, this is the second aspect of the proof of the authority of the church. If some act, some development would constitute the gates of hell prevailing against the church, then that can't happen. Then we know by definition that hasn't happened, because the promises of Christ are irrevocable. So, anything Peter binds on earth is bound in heaven, and the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. That is why and how we know that the church has its authority. So that is how you need to approach questions in these apocalyptic times today. To become a better Catholic than you ever have been before. Don't even think about leaving the church. Drill down to the basics and let that define your approach to your own life and to the issues of the day. So obviously, as we said, the Pope's signature slapped in some document doesn't mean the Pope is binding something. Not even close. So all these theologians telling you that you have to submit to this fiducia supplicans because it's from the Vatican and the Pope signed it, they've completely lost the plot. Maybe they once had it. Maybe they once had the plot. Maybe they even spent years promoting the very prophecies I've mentioned before, but they've since lost the plot, and they are now enemies of the truth. So what's something that the Pope has bound? There's, of course, many things. I can't go through all the dogmas of the faith with you here in just the few minutes I hope to finish this video up in. But I will bring up just one thing real quick here. And those who've listened to me for a while already know exactly what I'm going to say. Fidei Depositum, Apostolic Constitution, a high level, very high level magisterial document from Pope St. John Paul II. What does he say in this? Well, this is the magisterial document that promulgated the Catechism of the Catholic Church in 1992. And he says, by virtue of my apostolic authority, he declares by virtue of his apostolic authority that this catechism is a statement of the Church's faith and Catholic doctrine, which cannot change. And then he says, I declare. Look for those binding words. I'm sorry, my screen keeps generating automatic text there. That is the Pope binding something. He is declaring the text that existed then. We're not talking about a crystal ball here where he's looking at every revision or every addition that could possibly have slipped into it in the future. No, the text that existed when he wrote this apostolic constitution, he is declaring it to be a sure norm for teaching the faith. So, I am well aware that plenty of people will argue against me for this, modernists and traditionalists alike, but I stand by it. I don't care who disagrees with me. This is the Pope in an apostolic constitution, invoking his apostolic authority, saying this is a statement of this text is a statement of Catholic doctrine, and he is declaring it a sure norm of teaching the faith. Now, if that's not the Pope binding something, then I don't know what is. So why am I bringing this up again? Because, for the same reason I always do, this will keep you safe. Stick with it. The Pope has bound it, the original content of it. So have a hard copy on your desk, and if you don't have one, you better get it right away. Because who knows what they'll slip into the digital versions in the future, which will not have the backing of that apostolic constitution. I'm not saying it'll necessarily be wrong. I'm just saying it doesn't, on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily have the trustworthiness that the original text has. And yes, there's been some revisions, but none of those early revisions did not substantially affect faith and morals. So if you stick with what you've got on your desk, you will be okay. You'll be all right. Keep it handy. Whenever you hear something fishy coming from the Pope, his personal opinions, his homilies, his interviews, his talks with whatever, or some Vatican dicastery, or some theologian with 1,000,000 degrees, always pick this up and check what you hear against this. And anyone who contradicts this, side with this. Every single time. The apocalyptic times that we're entering into now, they will indeed be a trial. But they will not be an IQ test. These times will be triumphed through by faithful simplicity, not by nuance. Those with a solid, pious, devout Catholic faith, they will easily survive. Relatively few scholars will. Those who know that they can find their answers, all the answers to these, to this chaos swirling in the church and the world, those who know they can find their answers in their Bible and their catechism, they will be all set. And that's what I am begging you to be among the ranks of. Those who know that that's where to find your answers. If you're doing that, you're safe. You can be at peace. Now, I want to conclude with another note of encouragement. As I said several minutes ago, everything that happens is within God's permissive will. He is completely in charge right now. All the chaos in the church and the world combined, all of that, combined times 1,000,000, it can't take away from his holding the reins for so much as a second. So never be afraid about what situations might be coming your way. So long as you trust in him, and you're striving to do and live in his will, everything that could possibly come your way is just another opportunity to build up treasures in heaven. Now, my heart especially goes out to those faithful priests right now who really feel like they're between a rock and a hard place, not knowing what to do in light of this document coming out and plenty of other developments that have been similarly difficult to navigate. But my message to them is this: be excited about the opportunities that you will have. God is in charge. Yes, as my point has been in this video, set your face like flint to never violate God's will, come what may. But then, if so long as you've done that wholeheartedly, then you can charge forward in all the situations that his will has placed you in. And how do you know if his will has placed you in a situation? If it happened. Because the past is by definition God's will, because it's out of your control. Everything beyond your control is God's will for you. Even if someone else sinned to bring it about. God didn't will that sin, but his permissive will did allow that to take place for your benefit, for you to use it for eternal glory. So as long as it's not a product of your own self-will, it's God's will. If you can't control it, it's God's will. If you're in a situation, it's God's will for you to respond to it in accordance with his will. And there's always some way you can respond to it in accordance with his will. There is no such thing as a one-way dead-end street when we're talking about the providence of Almighty God. So maybe this document means that you'll be approached by more homosexual couples than ever before. And if so, that's your golden opportunity. That is your chance to gently and compassionately and lovingly share the gospel with them. So obviously, I'm not saying you have to give them a fire and brimstone homily on the spot. Maybe that's what some people insist you have to do. That's not what I'm saying. Perhaps you could say something like this: thank you. You look these two people maybe in the eyes, and you say, thank you so much for coming to me. I've been hoping and praying that you would do this. Jesus wants to shower you with his graces, and I would love to bless you, but can I speak to each of you privately and individually first? So at that point, they'll either walk away, and you need to just let that go because you tried your sincere best. So you commend them to the mercy of God in your own prayers. Or they'll take you up on that offer. And then when you're speaking with each one person individually, then you can ask him, let him do the talking. Just ask a couple questions. Then you can, what exactly is it that you're looking for? What exactly is it that you'd like from me? You can give him the opportunity to reveal to you the wound that's on his heart. And that's what you need to address, not necessarily the error on his lips. Sometimes that's worth addressing, but above all, you address the wound on the heart, which they will in some way reveal through their words, even if unintentionally. And then you can bless them individually. You can bless one person individually. You can bless him with a prayer that gently but also clearly indicates that you're praying for him to receive the graces to amend his life and return to God. I don't want to give you a specific prayer, because whatever you get in imploring the Holy Spirit to pray through you, that will be better. You do that, implore the Holy Spirit to pray through you, and he will. And I'm taking time here because although I'm specifically exhorting priests of this, a similar approach applies to everyone, even though a layman, of course, is not giving a priestly blessing. But then you can say to that person, if you're a priest, would you like to go to confession? You can say, I go to confession all the time. We all need it. It's easy. It's freeing. We can do it right here and now. No prerequisites. Just a sincere and contrite heart. I think all the time. I love one of my favorite stories of Fulton Sheen. He was evangelizing this famous young woman. I can't remember the details. And she knew that he was trying to evangelize her. So she said, I will only talk to you if you promise you won't ask me to go to confession. So he did. He said, okay, fine. And they're talking for a while. And then Fulton Sheen says, and then as we were passing by the confessional, I simply pushed her into it. And he says, I did not ask. So he kept his promise. He didn't ask, but he just kind of gave her a little nudge into the confessional. No, he didn't shove her. Just a tiny little nudge. And that was all she needed to realize that she just had to confess her sins. And like that, her life radically changes. That's what the grace of confession can do. And maybe in God's permissive will, this chaos of this horrible document is being allowed in part. I already gave some other explanations of the silver lining, but maybe another silver lining is that this is giving you an opportunity to evangelize that you haven't had before. So take that opportunity. You can change a whole life and a whole eternity in a moment. As a priest, especially above all with confession. But anyone actually can change someone's whole life and whole eternity in a moment if they're open to God's will. So whether you're a priest or a layman or a laywoman, understand that everything is opportunity for those who love God and strive to do his will. Be open to those opportunities, and then you will become a portent of grace for the whole world, whoever you are. God bless you.